por estar aquí todos esta mañana. Y es para mí un honor increíble presentar a Amaranth Borsuk, una persona que conozco desde bastante tiempo y que la sigo su trabajo desde Estados Unidos, ahora aquí en México. En realidad es un placer. Amaranth es poeta, es crítica académica, es teórica, es creativa, ha hecho libros de artistas. En realidad ella trabaja un poco con todo lo que tenga que ver con la palabra y su relación con cualquier tipo de material, sobre todo con el libro. Ha escrito libros, poemarios, ha escrito trabajo mucho más textual, que tiene que ver casi con la labor escultórica del libro, y una de sus piezas más importantes, que además vamos a mostrar aquí en Plataformas de la Imaginación, se llama In Between Page and Screen, y es creo que nos va a hablar de esto, ¿verdad?, ahora mismo, que básicamente investiga precisamente esto, la relación, la corporalidad que tenemos con el texto como algo realmente casi ergonómico, no tanto simplemente la palabra como algo concreto, sino cómo relacionarnos con el soporte digital, que también siempre es muy material y se nos olvida, ¿no? Entonces, no quiero seguir con esta presentación. También decir que es profesora, escribe y trabaja en la universidad en Washington, Bothell, y da clases de escritura creativa. Así que creo que también es una cuestión interesante ver cómo la labor artística de Amaranth siempre es una especie de investigación teórica, práctica, ¿no?, donde todo un poco se colapsa en este mundo de la poesía que ella nos trae hoy. Así que sin más dilación, os dejo con Amaranth. Muchas gracias.
Gracias.
Thank you so much, Alex, and thank you again. I sort of want to second Belen's thanks. It's such an honor to be here and to hear about the work that's happening in this laboratory, which is so close to all of my interests. So I feel like I'm going to learn so much over the next couple of days, and it's really a pleasure to be able to share some of my work with you. So I'm going to show you a few current works in progress, but I want to preface it with just a little bit of information about where I'm coming from right now as an artist, as a scholar, as a bookmaker and poet. So the title of my talk is The Hand and the Page in the Digital Age. And as some of you who might know my work know, I've been for a long time interested in text's materiality. That's both the way we can think of language as material, words themselves as having material qualities, which Belen really went into great detail about in her talk, but also the materiality through which we experience texts, or the book, the various forms it has taken over the ages, also the way in which typewriters, as Belen mentioned, or various writing technologies have changed the way that writers approach the making of work. So I'm interested in the way those technological interfaces impact our understanding of and our appreciation of the texts we encounter. But one potential drawback to that approach is that it can begin to treat meanings as somehow inherently stable within the technology itself. We can start to think that what we're close reading into the materiality of the book or the touch screen is inherent within it. But in fact, that's not the case, right? Because anytime we encounter a text, we encounter it differently, based on our embodiment, based on our age, our gender, our nationality. There are so many ways we're each individually situated as readers. The text can't necessarily be thought of as fixed in that way. So these are two quotes by thinkers who've been very useful to me in thinking through an idea of performative materiality, a materiality that emerges from the encounter of the reader with the work. And in these recent projects that I want to share with you, I'm trying to be attentive to the way the work is constructed in a dialogue with the reader, co-constructed by the reader, and embracing the hand of the reader, trying to bring their hand together with the book, with my own hand, and with the many hands that came before. So the hand has been a kind of central metaphor for me for a long time in my work. My first book of poems, Handiwork, has a series of poems within it that use the hand as a metaphor, connecting my hand as a writer to the hand of interrogators trained in aggressive interrogation tactics. It's partly because this is a book about my attempts to approach a family history through the Second World War and the Holocaust, which is full of holes, and I felt that there was a violence in trying to stitch up those holes, and wanted to implicate myself as a writer in that act of violence, in trying to access a family history that has purposefully been repressed by my ancestors who survived, for whom it was such a painful experience. In Between Page and Screen, this project, which is a collaboration with Brad Baus, the idea was to think about the situatedness of being between in this historical moment when we're torn between page-based reading devices and digital reading devices. I, as a writer and as someone who makes books by hand, am really invested in both and wanted to explore how we might make these two interfaces coexist. So it began as a handmade limited edition artist's book, and then it was published by Siglio Press. And I'll just show you a little bit of the experience of Between Page and Screen. Basically, Between Page and Screen is a book whose pages don't contain any text. Instead, it has these black and white geometric shapes, and then the instructions to find the words visit betweenpageandscreen.com. And when the reader does, what they confront is their own image, usually not in infinite regress. So anyway, the idea is that the reader confronts their own image and has to see themselves as the person who is between page and screen. And if they obey the instructions and they open up the book in front of their webcam, that's when the poems appear. Oh, thank you. Thank you. Yeah, lowering the light is great. Dear S, I fasten to become compact, but listen, that's only part your impact. I always wanted to fit a need. It's my character to pin, impinge, a twinge of jealousy, that fang tattoo. Last night on the patio, poco a patois between us, unseemly and peasant. Pleasant. Let's spread out the pent-up moment, pentimento, memento, a pact, our stories spinto, no more Esperanto. P. So you get a series of love letters between P and S, exploring the boundaries of their relationship. And in between their letters are these concrete animations, definitely an homage to the history of concrete poetry, that play with keywords in their letters. And their letters are full of etymological wordplay that is meant to be a kind of banter between them. Dear P, I take your point. I didn't mean to cut, but it's my stripe, my type. I'd rather shear than share. I wear a scarf to hide my scars. My scabs have scabs. My heart's a shard. I am that Scaramouche. I like a joust. My tattoo says keep out. I prefer Eros to arias, you've guessed, a bard of scabbards, a chorus of cuirass. Our nocturnal skirmish was a junto, just that. S. So through their wordplay, they're attempting to find a way to bring themselves into closer proximity to one another. And of course, as you probably noticed, as a reader, it's my role to keep these words on screen. Because if I move, or if I adjust ever so slightly, if I obscure, then the text disappears. So the book is orchestrated in such a way to bring attention back to the reader, because of course we're always embodied as readers when we're encountering a text, but we are acculturated to think about reading as a process of disembodiment, a process by which we disappear and the text enters our brain and we're in communion with the author and everything else disappears. And there are definitely works of literature I've experienced that are like that. But not all of them are, and some of them are attempting to draw attention to language itself, as Belen described. So that's Between Page and Screen, and one of the things that I learned as an author from the process of working on this book with Brad is that it's a book that is only constituted by its readers, for whom every single iteration will be different. Every background to the image is different. What they're wearing on a given day becomes part of the textual experience. So Brad and I had the chance to collaborate again more recently on this project called Whispering Galleries, which was a commission from a group called Site Projects in New Haven, Connecticut, that commissions site-specific artworks for the city of New Haven. So it was a chance to do something located in a town very close to where I grew up on the east coast of the US. This was a project that was funded through Connecticut at Work, which is a special Connecticut humanities initiative to fund works of art about labor. So this was a project intended to go into the public library in downtown New Haven to be very publicly accessible, and we thought of it as a chance to get the public to interact with text in a way that brings text to life. So we came up with this idea for whispering galleries, for a project that would bring voices from the past to the present to become accessible to a contemporary audience. To do that, we wanted to bring a historic text into the reader's hands. But not just any historic text. We wanted it to address the issue of labor, someone working physically. We also wanted it to address anonymity. Because, of course, there are many historic texts that come to us that are shelved on the library bookshelves. You can pull one down and time travel to another historic period. But what about the voices that don't get to tell their story? What about the voices of the very small figure in a town, in a small New England town? So this is a diary from 1858 that was kept by an anonymous shopkeeper, and I found it in an archive in New Haven. So this is a young man. His first trade job outside of his parents' factory, making tool handles, so working with his hands was part of his life from the very beginning. And he keeps this diary for a year, and in 1858 is kind of a nondescript year, not an important year, you would think. It turns out there are some historic and interesting things that happened in 1858, including the laying of the transatlantic telegraph cable, which ends up getting documented in this diary. But right beside such a historic event are very banal daily events. Diaries often begin with the phrase, "in the shop," or "swept out the shop." It's really a document of his labor. And the sentences are very matter of fact. They're almost shorthand. In some cases, he uses abbreviations. Instead of et cetera, you get the plus sign and the letter C, which maybe you'll see on one of these pages. So there are interesting correlations between the way that we keep track of our lives now, often through social media and through digital media, rather than this manual, longhand way of keeping track of our daily comings and goings. But another reason that this text was so interesting to me is that as much as it's a document of one person's life, it's a document of life in a small town. If you worked in a dry goods store in 1858, anyone who wanted to mail a letter came into your shop. Anybody who needed food for their animals would come through, or hay. And in addition to your labor in the shop every day, you were laboring for your neighbors. You were helping them cut down their hay in the summertime. You were helping them shovel their snow in the wintertime. So this person's life is so deeply connected with everyone else's lives, it becomes a portrait of an anonymous figure, but also a portrait of small town life. And that seemed to me like the kind of thing a library should provide for its patrons. You should feel a connection to the history of the space that you're in. So a whispering gallery, as many of you likely know, is an architectural space with a domed ceiling where visitors on opposite sides of the room can speak extremely quietly, but because of the shape of the dome, the sound travels across and you can hear the other person very clearly. So this is a picture of a whispering gallery in Grand Central Terminal in New York, where if you stand at opposite ends of this wall, you can hear the other person. And we like the idea of the whispering gallery as a kind of metaphor for this opportunity to hear voices from the past. So there are a couple of different whispering galleries in our whispering gallery. The first is the whispering gallery of the screen. When a visitor approaches the whispering gallery, they see their own reflection sort of distorted in that dome. And in front of them is one of these entries from the diary, which has been transcribed. The second whispering gallery is a different dome created by this, which is a leap motion controller. It's about the size of a pack of gum. And what it does is it projects infrared in a dome above it so that it can detect the location of your hands and allow you, using your hands in this dome of infrared space, to manipulate what is on screen. So this is an opportunity for visitors to reach out their hand physically to the hand of this ancestor, whose hand was central not only to his labor, but to his art. So in addition to working every day, every night he went home and played the violin. And he talks about playing the violin in these diaries. Every Sunday, he went and sang in the choir. You may be wondering, why am I using the male pronoun for this person? So through a little bit of research, it seems likely that this person would have been male, given his position in the dry goods store and the way that he refers to other people. But to be honest, I can't be 100% sure. So I want to be fair about that, but it's easier to say him. So I loved that there was this legacy of art hidden within this diary of labor, and that the hand was central to both. That's something that's been of great interest to me in my own work. And the idea for Whispering Galleries was to allow that alternative history to emerge from his diaries through a process of erasure. So the reader, sweeping their hand through this infrared space, brushes the dust like sweeping out the shop from the pages of the diary to reveal erasure poems hidden within that tell an alternative narrative about making art. So I'll show you a little bit of video documentation. Is it possible to turn up the sound? Okay, pardon, I'm going to have another moment of technological interference. I'm just not seeing the one that says sound. There we go. That's probably not it, is it? Okay, let's see. See. Okay, so we should be good now. Thank you. So by reaching out their hand, they can interact physically with this installation, revealing the poems that are hidden within the diary. And the hope is that there is a sense that the reader's embodiment allows them access to a hidden language, but it's a shared language. In the course of playing with or experiencing Whispering Galleries, the reader can read 30 diary entries that go over the course of an entire year, from January 1st to December 31st. They give you a sense of the flavor of life in a small New England town, sort of punctuated by both major events and small events, like a visit from the daguerreotype photographer who took everyone's picture, or a celebration of the 4th of July, or a fireworks display. And hopefully, in encountering those moments, they can see resonances with their own experience. So the next project that I want to share with you is called Abra, an expanded artist's book. And really, we call it a living text. This is a collaboration with the poet Kate Durbin and the media artist Ian Hatcher. And it's been a long time in the making. And I think of this as a transforming and transformative project, transforming in that it keeps mutating, and transformative in that, for me, it's been instrumental in helping me work through my own concerns about authorship, my pushback against the lyric poet that Belén talked about, and my interest in reaching out to the reader and creating a text that can be co-constructed with the reader. So ABRA began as a collaboration in which Kate and I, who are two very different poets, wanted to try braiding our aesthetics together. Kate's work is very concerned with pop culture, femininity, and teenage girlhood. And she's very performative in her practice. My work is very concerned, as you probably noticed in between page and screen, with language itself, with wordplay, with homophones, with etymologies. I like to feel language in my mouth. So this was an attempt for each of us to try on the other person's aesthetic. And we began from an interest in excess, in images of things that are considered beyond the norm. So we looked at artwork by artists like Amy Cutler, and considered ways in which the image is often pushing us to have a kind of pleasurable experience with mutation or excessiveness. We wanted to create a text that would, in language, approximate this experience of sort of the borderline between the grotesque and the delicious overabundance. So we began to write these poems in which we wove our language together. And we realized that these poems began to exceed either of us. They no longer seemed like a Kate Durbin poem, but they also no longer seemed like an Amaranth Borsuk poem. So in order to perform them and to embrace the performative materiality of the book, we needed to create a third person. And so we began to conceptualize of the speaker of this book as Abra. Her name, Abra, like abracadabra, evokes magical words that bring things into being, a kind of magical post-human figure who has access to all periods of history simultaneously and all sorts of embodiments simultaneously. This was one phase of our thinking through how to make a living text. And the poems themselves are concerned with themes of mutation and excess, images of braiding and interconnection. And so we began to try to braid our physical embodiments together in these conjoined apparatuses. The only problem with this approach is that it brings attention back to us as the author, and it establishes a kind of speaker and a speaker's body, which can prevent the reader from feeling that their own embodiment enters into the text. So in order to bring this project to, I'll see if I can get this to work. One thing that I should have explained and did not explain. So the poems on the pages of the book mutate physically on the page. Like a flip book, as the reader turns the pages, the poems shift and grow one into the next. This could be a Wi-Fi thing. If it plays, great. If not, imagine the words move and grow. And on the facing page, there's an illustration that grows next to it, mutating, to eventually reach across and into the text. So how do we make that mutation more palpable? Well, thanks to a grant from the Center for Book and Paper Arts at Columbia College Chicago, we were able to move into a new phase with ABRA called the Expanded Artist Book. And the idea behind this grant was to encourage writers and artists to make artist books that are born digital, that have both a material component but also an iPad component that are integrated with one another. And for us, because of my own practice, it was really important to me that the iPad app not just be a remediation of the poems Kate and I had written, but in fact use the affordances of the iPad itself and the ways that we interact with it physically as part of the way that it makes meaning. So we began working with the Center for Book and Paper Arts, and this is when Ian Hatcher, who is seated to my right in this photograph, joined the project to help create this next version of ABRA. They were going to fabricate the artist book there in their studios, and it was put together by Amy Rabas, who is a graduate of their book arts program. And the idea was to make the physical book and the digital book into a continuous touchscreen interface. Because of course books are very tactile, and they've always been touchable. From the earliest cuneiform impressions, which you can run your fingers over to feel those indentations, to the tablet touchscreen. So we wanted this book to feel like it was referencing the deeper history of books and bookmaking while also glancing ahead to the digital future of books. So the artist's book contains a lot of references to print history, including the use of gold to emblazon the text, like in manuscript illumination, the use of impression, blind impression, on the letterpress in the first pages, where there is no ink, but you can only feel the text if you run your fingers over it. And then finally, the text begins to heave itself off the page and to animate visually. The text is printed in 2 colors, and that's to enact that mutating that happens when one poem appears. It spreads out its words, and the words of the next poem appear in the interstices that get opened. The old words are printed in gray, and this is a thermochromic ink that disappears when heat is applied to it. So it encourages the reader to get very intimate with the page, touching it, blowing on it, whatever you can do to heat it up to make that language disappear. It also uses rainbow foil printing, and gradually openings begin to appear in the page. These are also written with light. These were laser-cut openings that gradually reveal the book as a structure not just of surface, but of depth. The book is a volume, and we can see into it when we bore holes into it. As the reader pages through, these holes then coalesce, another kind of animation that happens, until an opening appears, revealing the iPad that has been inserted into the back of the book, where the same text is mutating on its own. And the reader is then able to encounter that text with their hand and begin to take part in the process of mutation. This is a GIF animation to show you what paging through the book looks like. So it's an animated process that is animated by the reader. And when the reader reaches that last page, of course, the depth of that black screen is like a well in which the poems are appearing, but it's also a mirror in which they see their own reflection. So I am going to unplug this, and we'll see if I can. For my third technological error, perhaps, of the day, demonstrate for you the app and some of the features that make it continuous with the artist's book. Voila. So Abra. Abra is a living text, and the reader navigates it by spinning this dial at the bottom of the screen that allows them to travel anywhere within the text. And as they move from one poem to another, any shared words between the poems remain in place. They share letters with one another. They mutate one into the next. But the reader is then also invited not just to navigate the texts as we've written them, but to alter the text to their own specifications. If I touch the mutate button, I have the power to mutate the word lisping by touching it into rising, plush, into blush, snout, into spout. Abra looks for correspondences and mutates the text to language that at first seems close to the language it's replacing, but gradually the more you mutate a single word, the further it gets from its point of origin. I can also graft my own language into this poem. And by touching the screen, I can teach Abra new words, new magic words. As you can see from looking at the language on this page, these poems are highly excessive, they're challenging to read, and they don't make meaning in the way a traditional lyric poem does. But they have a lot of vivid imagery, a ravishing bustle, earth's plain pudge, so much pillage, sweet talking. But to make greater meaning from it, the reader can prune away some of the language, trimming to make a smaller and tighter work. They can also erase to create a kind of drawing. And when they're tired of trying to shape the text in this way, they can cast a magic spell by pushing the Kadabra button. Which will have unexpected results. Because it uses the iPad, any language that the reader has access to through their keyboard is possible to enter into the text. And that means that one can be teaching Abra to speak as oneself, or one can mutate and join with the body of Abra to sound the ecstatic helix, to put luminous soars into this text and mutate it further. I touched the word waning, and it brought me a waning moon. Am I at the end of my time? Okay, so as a last thing, I'll see if I can connect my laptop one more time. It's a fool's errand, I know, but I have to try anyway. So the thing about the Abra artist book is that it's a limited edition, and very few people will be able to actually hold that book in their hands. But the app is free to the public and downloadable in the App Store. And that means that it takes part in the tradition of the artist book as a democratic form, one that allows access to many. And in the interest of leaving you not with my voice and the sense that this is my authorial project, but a reminder that this is a collaboration, I'll play a short video clip. This is about 1.5 minutes, and we can let it fade out. We don't have to watch the whole thing, but so that you hear the voices of my collaborators, Kate Durbin and Ian Hatcher. And this is a poem that Kate and I did not write. This is a screen capture of me playing with the app to generate poems by spinning the dial, by mutating text, and then we layered our voices on top of it. Thank you all very much. Thank you again. Sorry.
Thank you, Amaranth, for this marvelous presentation and for showing us that technology has one side, which is this problematic side of plugging in and plugging out, but then the other one, which is very magical, and combined with literature, it just, is more than abracadabra. We are just on time. We have time for 2 questions. So, quien quiera hacerle una pregunta a Amaranth, por favor, no duden en hacerlo.
En lo que se deciden, nada más recordarles que también la obra de Amaranth Borsuk va a estar presente en una de las exposiciones de Plataformas de la Imaginación. En este caso vamos a poder ver su Between Patient Screen e interactuar con él en CCU Tlatelolco a partir del 12 de noviembre.
Or is it a local experience?
That's a really good question. So that was a big concern for us. Our initial version was to make it so that one could have the language one teaches Abra appear in other people's installations of the app. That became increasingly concerning when we realized it could be used to propagate hate speech. And that would be the furthest thing from what we want Abra to do, since she's an instrument of connection. So we decided that the way that we would allow sharing is through, you can send screen captures from the app to other people and post them to Twitter and Facebook, but the changes that you make to the app remain within your own installation of the app. It was a practical choice, and I really would love for it to be shareable in the first way, but the only way to do it would be to sort of police people's activity, and from a free software standpoint, and from a sort of free speech standpoint, that also seemed problematic. Thanks.
¿Alguien más? Sí.
What about the printed book? Where is it available?
The printed book is available through our website, which is abra.com. Abra spelled with a dash between every letter. And I don't yet know what the price is going to be. It's going to be an edition of 20 copies. So it is likely to be mostly experienced in exhibitions, sadly. But, you know, the same way with Between Page and Screen, that was a limited project that ended up being able to be mass reproduced, which was wonderful. And in fact, now there's a PDF of this book available for download on our website and instructions to bind the book yourself so that readers can bind their own copy of the book and experience that materiality and how that binding actually influences your understanding of the book. So who knows, hopefully, maybe Abra one day could become a more widely available object. I would like that. I also hope that just in general, I get a chance to play with more books that have thermo ink because that's incredibly magical. But sadly, it's very limited right now. Thanks.
Cerramos con esto.
Perdón por acaparar a Amaranth antes y ahora, pero so I have a question related to artist books and sort of the history and the traditions of artist books that also have to do a lot with traditions of literature and poetry, kind of joining, kind of making a link between your talk and Belen's talk, right? Because she was talking about kind of like two traditions of writing, which one would be kind of a more, I don't know, let's say, semantic writing and another more material way of writing, right? And when you're thinking about artist books, there's also kind of not such a clear-cut tradition, but one that would think of the book as a sort of democratic multiple, right? And so you say, well, everybody could have access to the app. But then there's another tradition, right, that is saying, no, the book is like architecture, it's auratic, it should be revered and admired, and not like the Abra book itself kind of seems like that, right? So it seems like there's a tension between those two traditions and also like a merge and a hybridity, like you were saying, the work itself between those two. Was this something that you were also trying to explore, these two traditions of bookmaking, artist books?
Yeah, that's a really beautiful observation, Alex, very much so. So the notion of the book as a kind of spiritual instrument or a kind of prophetic instrument as embodied in that very limited object, which is bright white in color on its cover. It has this kind of shiny metallic imprint. It almost looks like a magical and very rare and special thing. It also has a gold color around the edges, so right, it seems to take part in that tradition. And so hopefully there is a kind of contrast, but also synergy between the two when they meet, given that each is making reference to both. The typeface that's used in the app and all of the icons come from a historic typeface that was used to print the Bible. So there's a way in which we want both to speak to both and suggest that as much as there could be a divide, it's not necessarily a firm boundary. Thanks for that observation.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank
Amaranth.
you.